Now I'd like to discuss the theological advantages of the Christian worldview, especially as Van Til laid them out. He said, first of all, that the Christian advantage is that Christianity and only Christianity is what he called two-circle thought. Now, to be honest and transparent, Van Til, he was at Westminster, right, a reformed theologian, philosopher. So he actually said Calvinistic thought is alone two-circle thought. He thought Arminians also were not sufficiently two-circle theologians. But for our sake, we'll emphasize the Christian advantage. And what he meant by two-circle thought was God's up here and we are down here. He said God is the self-contained, triune, ontological God. There's God, the infinite creator, and then everything else. Because he thought Arminians emphasized human free will too strongly, he thought they kind of blurred the line between the infinite creator and finite creatures. But we'll leave that aside, and we'll just talk about the Christian advantage of two-circle thought. In fact, this was one of Van Til's calling cards. He was known for this. And at Westminster, the janitor would tease him, and he would write one big circle on the chalkboard, and Van Til would come in and see that one big circle and kind of grab the janitor by the throat and joking, like pretending he was going to choke him, until one day when he grabbed a little bit too hard. No, that didn't happen. But they did have just a kind of a fun, it was back and forth, because Van Til was known as saying we're two-circle people. So the ontological chasm. So if you've had theology class with me, you know I say all Christian thought begins with the infinite ontological chasm between God and us. I learned this from Jim Greer, who was Van Til's student, and so I'm passing it on to you. Van Til's point was that every other false religion is one-circle thought. For instance, Islam. Islam blurs the line between God and the God, the creator, and the creature. That may seem hard to imagine because Muslims talk about God being infinite and high above us. But in this great book I use in Sis Theo 1, Delighting in the Trinity by Michael Reeves, he explains how that might be in that book on page 52. He says, for example, something the enormously influential Muslim theologian Abu Hamid al-Ghazali, 1056 to 1111, once wrote, quote, God does indeed love them, people, but in reality he loves nothing other than himself, in the sense that he is the totality of being, and there is nothing in being apart from him. So Reeves' point is that Muslims put so much emphasis in Allah being all in all, and he's everything, that they tend to minimize the creation and kind of blur them together. He says, because Allah really, quote, loves nothing other than himself, he does not really turn outward to express his love to others. Thus, there can be no reason why anything else should exist. Really, therefore, quote, there is nothing in being apart from him, unquote. Of course, the Quran speaks of Allah's love and of creation, but it's hard to see quite how those things can be. Now here's the key line. Reeves says, the universe, in Islamic thought, must have only a shadowy, uncertain existence. So Reeves is saying the Muslims emphasize God being so high and transcendent that they actually lean towards panentheism, where the creation itself doesn't have a true and independent existence outside of God. You also, I think Van Til would make the case that Muslims blur the line between us and God by emphasizing the possibility of meritorious works. Right? Muslims say that God accepts us we're saved by believing in him and doing good works. And hopefully our good works are enough. Well, I think Van Til's right. He would say that if you could do something to contribute to your right standing with God, to your acceptance, then aren't you blurring the line between the infinite creator and finite you? So his point was that only the Christian, he would say Calvinism, but for our purposes, only the Christian worldview has two-circle thought. On Moodle, I have some handouts. One is quotes from the best of Van Til, and some others are from excerpts from a book by Greg Bahnsen, who was a Van Tilian strong supporter. And I'm looking now on Moodle to hand out two mutually exclusive positions, and just some places where Van Til emphasized this. On page 710, just below halfway, he says, "It is this Christian story that is alone able to resolve the dilemmas of the modern mood. The dilemmas of the modern mood are the false dilemmas of all non-Christian thought, and all these dilemmas reduced to one. They are all based on the assumption that man is the ultimate reference point in all his interpretation. It is the would-be self-sufficient, this would-be autonomous man, that sets himself up as judge above the claims of the self-authenticating Christ. The one issue that lies back of all other issues is that between the self-authenticating man and the self-authenticating Christ." So this is Van Til's attempt to say that the modern autonomous man stands up and kind of tries to blur the line between him and God and make everything just one circle thought. It goes on and says this autonomous man is sometimes known as the rational man, or the moral man, or the scientific man. And by the way, there's a lot of similarity there between Van Til and, actually, he would hate this, but Karl Barth. Barth says something quite similar, that just as God is high above us ethically, we cannot raise our pinky finger to even please him or satisfy him or earn our acceptance with him. So epistemologically, so it's both ethically and epistemologically, we are at the mercy of God. We cannot make the first move towards him. So whether it's morality or rationality or science, we should know our place. On the back, on that handout, page 711, just below halfway, Van Til says, "It appears then that if there is to be any intelligible encounter between the Christian and the non-Christian, it must be in terms of the two mutually exclusive visions that each entertains. To appeal to the law of contradiction and or facts, or to a combination of these apart from the relation that these sustain to the totality vision of either," that's totality vision is a word for worldview, "the believer or the unbeliever, is to beat the air. It is well to say that he who would reason must presuppose the validity of the laws of logic. But if we say nothing more basic than this, then we are still beating the air. The ultimate question deals with the foundation of the validity of the laws of logic. We have not reached bottom until we have seen that every logical activity in which any man engages is in the service of his worldview, or totality vision." So notice there, when it comes to common ground, Van Til says, of course, laws of logic, basic facts, these are common ground, but whoop-de-doo. You have common ground, but you're actually very far apart, because how you use this common ground, how you use these tools of reason, it makes a big difference in your worldview, where you're coming from. Are you a Christian? Or are you a non-Christian? Or even worse, just an atheist? It makes a big difference. So Van Til's first point is that only Christians, and again, he would say Calvinists, but only Christians have fully, robustly two-circle thought. God, the infinite, immutable, eternal creator, is up here, and we, his creatures, are real and true, but dependently existing. We are separate from God, but we have a real, true, yet dependent existence on God, but no part of us is God. We're not just a shadowy, we don't matter kind of creation. We actually matter. We're true. We have a real existence, but we depend on God. So two-circle thought. Next, Van Til says also another distinction is the Christian God is one who is absolutely personal. And this, if you look in the 5 Views book on 223 through 228, John Frame, Van Til student, tries to make much of this. In the heading Sketch of an Apologetic, at the bottom of 223, he mentions there's 2 big ultimate explanations for the world, personal and impersonal. In 224, he says impersonal would be like Buddhism because the divine there is impersonal. You might have Hinduism that has some persons involved, but none of them are absolute because there are all these pantheons of gods and no one is the highest or the true God. So he says, 224, near the end of the first full paragraph, Frame says, only in biblical religion is there a personal absolute, a being who is truly ultimate, but who also plans, speaks, thinks, acts in history, rejoices, grieves, loves, and judges. Now, biblical religion, that for Frame, that reduces it down to three, right? Christianity, Judaism, and Islam. We alone have a personal absolute, a God who is personal. And Frame goes on to say how against the modern worldview, where, especially modern philosophy, where impersonal is preferred because impersonal is dealing with just abstract thought, and that seems to be higher and purer than literary writings, which use stories, and stories involve people, and that's for children. If you're a grown up, you should be beyond literature and stories. You're dealing just with pure abstract thought. Philosophers are kind of a bit cocky, and they think if you're as smart as them, you should be able to talk in just purely abstract ideas with not even any illustrations, because that's concrete, and that's for children. So against that arrogance, Frame says, like in 228, first little paragraph, actually you can't even have ethics without a personal absolute. Absolute obligations can only be obligations to an absolute person. If reality is ultimately impersonal, well, how can you have ethics? How can something be evil if there is no person who's offended by what you've done? So Islam, Judaism, and Christianity all have personal absolutes, but third, here's the kicker, only Christians have a personal absolute who's triune, three persons in one. Some advantages of the Trinity. First, it's essential for God's aseity. Aseity means God's independent existence, right? How do you have two-circle thought? Well, only if God is a Trinity, because only if he's a Father, Son, and Spirit is he three persons who are entirely self-contained. God isn't lonely. He didn't make us because he wanted a conversation partner. He's perfectly fine, just eternally, just himself, Father, Son, and Spirit. So how can you have fully two-circle thought with the upper circle being blissfully self-contained unless God's a Trinity? With the Muslim God, Allah, he made the world either because he was missing something and wanted someone to talk to, or this world just, as Reeve said, this world just comes out of him, and it's kind of a shadowy, non-real existence because he alone is what matters. Secondly, the Trinity is essential for personality. How do you have God is three persons that are in relationship, right? And that explains how we are persons who need people. If God is just one person, only one person, then again, how is this one person not needy? Or how can he be in relationship with if he's all that's ever existed? But if God is three persons, then he exists in relationship, and so you have full-blooded, robust persons that are eternal. And third, and this gets a little bit philosophical and maybe isn't like the clinching argument, but Van Til says the Trinity is necessary for the one, to explain the one and the many. The one and the many, it's a perennial philosophical problem. The one would be the principle of unity, and the many would be the principle of plurality. And philosophers often worry about how do you combine the one and the many. In fact, every thought you ever had is a combination of that. You assert something about something else. And the thing you're talking about, that's the one. And what you're saying about it is one of many things you could say about that. So even saying the window is open, the window is the one and it's open, that's a many. One of the many things you could say about the window. You could say it's transparent, you could say it's shut, you could say it's broken, but you said it's open. So every statement is a combination of the one and the many. And philosophers wonder, like, how exactly does this work? How do you combine these? Again, this is not, for a lot of us, it's just whatever. We deal with more practical matters. But philosophers wonder about how you unite these things. In fact, Reeves mentions it in his book on the Trinity. He says on page 61, there needs to be such a thing as ultimate plurality for math to make any real sense. For me to believe that the number 2 actually means something. And yet there also needs to be such a thing as ultimate unity, so that 1 plus 1 always equals 2, and not sometimes 83. To be coherent and meaningful, math requires the existence of ultimate plurality in unity. Now, I'm not sure I understand why that's so, but that's the claim, right? You have to have the one and the many. Philosophers worry about this. If you emphasize the oneness so strongly, you get something very abstract. If you emphasize the plurality and the many too much, you get something that's very atomistic, and you're breaking things up into parts. So somehow we have to bring the parts into unity to have a coherent picture. So the thinking is, well, the Trinity does that, because in God you've got one essence and 3 persons. Unity and plurality are both ultimate, and so math makes sense. So again, I'm not saying this is like a knockdown, obvious, clinching argument, but it's something that's used fairly common in Christian thought. So metaphysically, Van Til says only Christians have 2-circle thought, the infinite creator and us the creatures. Only Christians have a personal absolute who isn't lonely or needy, because only Christians have a Trinity. And that is important both for the ontological chasm to sustain it, and also to explain how math makes sense, apparently, and to explain why we are persons. How do we understand ourselves as people? And why do people need people? Why are we in relationship? Well, because God is a Trinity. And then epistemically, in the 5 Views book on 212 and 213, Frame explains how only the Christian thought avoids overconfident rationality on one hand, or despair and irrationality on the other. I once listened to a lecture by Frame and took some notes, and this is on Moodle. It's Frame, Transcendence and Immanence. If you call out that overhead, you see there's the unbeliever on one side, the Christian on the other, and this is what Frame was saying. You have 2 poles, transcendence and immanence. And if you're not a Christian, if you don't have the Bible as revelation, he says you often oscillate back and forth between reason, which I figured it out. I know how the world works. I know what stuff is, which can fill you up with pride. But then you look at the starry sky and go, uh-oh, I don't have it figured out. There's something that far transcends me, and that can lead you to skepticism or the irrational pole. So some examples, and he mentioned these on 212 and 213, but also from his lecture. He says, so just to show that people who don't start with Scripture as revelation, if you're just trying to figure out the world by yourself, how you will always sort of oscillate between I've got it, to oh no, I don't have it. So rationality to irrationality. For example, the ancient Greek philosopher Parmenides, his irrational pole was all is being. Whatever exists is being. The irrational pole was, well, how do you explain change? He said, well, change must be, it's a myth. It's an illusion. It doesn't really exist. Yeah, but it kind of does. Or Plato, his rational pole was the forms. The forms of these pure, eternal, unchanging ideals. His irrational pole was matter. How do you explain matter in the material world? Descartes, his rational pull was, I can prove my existence, and from me I can prove the world. His irrational pull was, but he based all that proof on radical doubt. I doubt, therefore I think, therefore I am. Or Hume. Hume was quite skeptical, and he was emphasizing irrationality, and yet he used reason as a basis to be skeptical. Or Immanuel Kant, his rational pull was the phenomenal. The phenomenal world is the world that you can know, but the noumenal world lies beyond us, and that's irrational, something that we cannot know. Or Hegel. Hegel's rational pull was he thought he could explain the entire world. He knew exactly how everything caused everything else. He was kind of a megalomaniac. But his irrational pull was the logic that he had that explained everything. His logic moved. It went from thesis to antithesis to synthesis. Well, logic doesn't move. Logic is stationary. Logic is dependable and stable. Logic is not in motion. So with this handout, Frame says that if you're not starting from Christian revelation, the biblical revelation, you just keep going back and forth between I've got it and I'm right, I figured it out, and it makes you sort of confident and even proud. So to, oh no, there's something that never fits. There's something that I can't grasp with my system. The Christian, he says, doesn't have to go back and forth because we don't have to figure it out. We have revelation. Our revelation comes from the one who does know everything, and because God has all knowledge, the pressure's off me. I don't have to figure it out. I don't have to start for myself and try to explain how the world works. God's got this. He knows how the world works, and I'm able to be content with what he has disclosed to me. So the Christian worldview doesn't go back from pride to skepticism. We allow for mystery, right? There's a lot to God that we will never comprehend, but he has revealed truth to us, and so we're actually able to know things and build doctrine. So Van Til's point was there are some important theological advantages from the Christian worldview. There are things that we alone have a two-circle thought where both circles are true, right? Creatures are a real existence, and yet God is the infinite creator. We alone have a trinity, and that's so important. And because God has all knowledge, we don't have to figure it out. We're allowed to start with revelation. Now, if that's true, if we have these Christian advantages, what might we do with these? How might we use them to form some apologetic arguments in defending the faith and hopefully leading other people to Jesus? Well, that's next.